Why do we still have percent completions on games? Honestly, does anyone outside of completionists actually enjoy booting up a game to see that they only have 10% remaining? In case you haven't realized by my first two sentences, I do not like when games include how much of the game has elapsed and how much of the game remains. I think with any game, the state every developer is trying to achieve in a player is one of flow. That is to say, a state in which the player is both challenged by the obstacles presented before them, but equipped with the tools and abilities to eventually overcome them, even if it takes a few tries. But a constant focus on how far you've come and how far you have left to go, how many collectibles you have left to collect, and how many random encounters you have left to encounter, can break that state of flow and ruin the immersion so many people have worked to build. Think about how often percentages to completion ruin things. When the loading screen says 99% complete, but that last 1% takes longer than the previous 99, or when there's only one achievement left to unlock in a game, but it requires you to do the most mind-numbing garbage gameplay on repeat. But even these miss the problem with having percentages within games. Imagine watching a movie and every 10 minutes you see a small percentage of how much of the movie you've made it through coming up in the corner. It would take you out of the experience. It breaks your suspension of disbelief and immersion in whatever you're watching. Why would you want that? Heck, if we're going this far, why not go a little further? Why not calculate the average human lifespan and have a percentage completion on you and how long you have left alive? Oh wait, that's actually kind of a real thing, a calendar that lets you tick off how many weeks you have left to live. And even though it's meant to get you to be grateful for the time you have on this planet, it seems completely counterintuitive to living in the moment. Let me take a step back and explain to you what set me off. What set me down this path of raging against the percent sign. Let's take a look at Days Gone. This is Make Big Games. Now, Days Gone is a game that I feel somewhat unfairly got some hate when it came out. It's in no way groundbreaking, the combat can be a bit bland, especially at the start, and some of the mechanics feel, let's just say, obnoxious at times. But it's a game that has made it clear that a ton of time, effort, and care has gone into its creation. The development of its characters, and even the general story arcs throughout, are, for the most part, really intriguing, and keeps you as the player wanting to know what happens next, and I was fairly surprised at some of the twists. It has a deep lore that you can learn more about through its dialogue, optional recorders, and other collectibles. Not just about the outbreak, but also about the landscape that you're in, that's based on real-world places within Oregon. I think that's great, and if this is a game that you are on the fence about, I would absolutely recommend you pick it up, especially since it goes on such deep sales. But what's absolutely abhorrent about the game in my opinion is the percentages that come up each and every time you complete a mission. You see, the game goes beyond nearly every other game I've seen when it comes to its post-mission displays, and part of that stems from its story progression. The story missions can come from several different camps scattered throughout the world. Each of these camp missions, or even specific characters giving missions within those camps, will help push the mainline story further. But the weird thing is that sometimes there are these missions that push multiple camp narratives forward, leading to absolutely wonky looking screens like this one, where one mission is completed, another is started, and 4 other missions are advanced simultaneously. It makes me feel like I'm looking at a children's game that you would find in a magazine while waiting at the doctor's office that says, can you find all the percent signs? 1 here, 5 here, and don't forget your character level having its own percentage in the corner. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I love games with a story. Something to say. Characters that develop deep relationships between each other. Games that can leave you feeling different than you did when you first started them up. I love the feeling of being immersed in a world, able to achieve a level of escapism that allows me not to worry about the normal stressors in everyday life. But when a game takes on such a simple UI choice, but ramps it up to 10 to the point where it's completely baffling, I can't help but realize that I'm playing a game. An elaborate set of pulsing electricity detected as 1s and 0s to create audio and visual simulations of situations that will never happen in real life. Its immersion shattered. So what's a better alternative to this? Literally anything in my opinion, but let me just give some examples. In Naughty Dog games like Uncharted and The Last of Us, the game moves from one chapter to another almost seamlessly, and these are the prime examples of how to keep the player engaged in the story. But I don't think it's fair to make that comparison, since comparing a game that's solely focused on telling a linear story to an open world game isn't really fair. Thankfully, there are seemingly endless zombie games to make comparisons to. Dying Light 2 is far from a perfect game. As far as zombie games go, I prefer Days Gone to Dying Light 2. Not the first one though, that one holds a special place in my heart. But in Dying Light 2, when you complete a mission, this is what appears on your HUD. Yeah, freaking perfect in my opinion for an open world game. You completed your last mission, the next one's available, and you can see your XP increase using the symbols for specific combat and parkour capabilities. This gives you even more information than Days Gone's end of mission screen, but there's one critical difference. It doesn't interrupt the flow of gameplay. While you're seeing this information, you can paraglide to the next objective, toss a zombie off of a building, or whatever else you want. Your experience in Villador continues on unimpeded, but if you were waiting for the next skill point, you can easily see that you've earned it and navigate to it in the menu using the game's awful cursor system. Like I said, it's far from perfect. But ultimately, I think a far too understated part of story-heavy games is the emphasis put on the player's immersion. From a business perspective, having a break like this gives the player far too much of an opportunity to put the game down for the moment or never to pick it back up. It's the same reason streaming services like Netflix or YouTube autoplay into the next video or episode of a show. Removing the barrier of you having to do something as small as clicking into the next episode can keep you on the platform much longer. When a game moves from one mission into the next, or simply into an open world without a clean break, it keeps the player engaged. It keeps them in a flow state and can lead to them playing longer. Autoplay is so effective that the United States at one point considered putting regulations on it into place, limiting the ability to autoplay on platforms like YouTube. But that's not to say that there shouldn't be any form of breaks in a game. Going back to YouTube, for example, if there was no lag at all between videos, it might come across as jarring for the viewer, especially if it's content they don't want to see, making them more likely to click off. In the same way, I personally loathe the way Dark Souls games don't have a real pause screen. The games are always on, the world always going. While that's fine for games like Ark or Rust, in a single-player experience, it can actually lead to adverse consequences. If I'm playing Elden Ring and I need to let my dog outside, I'm far more likely to just quit out of the game rather than risk losing all my runes to this nerd in an AFK 1v1. That's beside the point, but I stand by it. Come on, FromSoft, get with the program. But these choices aren't just beneficial for the companies hoping to get you hooked on their game for as long as possible. They also make the game more appealing for the player. Even in multiplayer games, I found that the fewer screens I have to slog through that are trying to reward me with all the useless digital points, currency, skins, and loot boxes I can tolerate just to hop into the next game, the more I'm willing to play. But unfortunately, those are the moneymakers. Ultimately, this may come down to each person's personality and preference for the media they consume. As an example that I think works well in calling your attention to how far you have left, I would like to present a few books. In Stephen King's The Running Man, a great book about a dystopian futures version of Family Feud, its chapter structure starts at 99 and counts down through the remainder of the book. Although the chapters don't all follow the same page length, this structure still didn't sit well with me despite how much I loved the book. And that was because it made me constantly aware of how much of the book I had left. Sure, I could just look at how far through the book I was, but when you're really engrossed in a story, you aren't really thinking about how many pages you're holding in your right versus your left hand. But to see that you're down to 20 left can pull you out of the story to recognize just how close you are to its conclusion. Another one of King's works that used a similar countdown method, but that I felt I was not only okay with, but actually enhanced the story, was in the book Thinner, where an overweight lawyer gradually becomes, you guessed it, thinner. As the chapters count down from his weight at the beginning, its tie into the story only raises the tension that the reader experiences. It can give a similar indication as to how much of the story remains, but it's quite literally part of the narrative, so it doesn't break my immersion when reading it, unlike with The Running Man and with Days Gone. In the end, there's so often a trade-off between what benefits the company that makes the game and what makes the player experience better. But it's not always black and white, benefiting the developer or the player. In some cases, we can make a game that keeps the player hooked by decreasing the interruption to their flow state. And I know I was hard on Days Gone, but it really is a good game, especially for the price it frequently goes on sale for. I picked it up for $16.50. But who knows, it may go for even less at some point. If you played Days Gone, did the mission end screen bug you too, or am I just reading entirely too much into things? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.